to the Wednesday, August 12th meeting of the Community Budget Advisory Committee. The first item in the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll come to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The agenda is approved. Next up is item 3.1, the approval of the meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion regarding the minutes?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes. Unless there's any discussion, I will call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. We'll then go on to item number 4.1, the information and updates, and I'll call on Kari Carlson.
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Peterson. Hello, everyone. So tonight, all I have for the information and update section is just a deeper look at the calendar and what we will be covering. And as you see, we have the preliminary levy recommendation coming up at the end of August, and tonight's meeting will be focused on that, as well as community engagement. And just as an overview, the departments will all be coming to the committee meetings, and they'll be coming 3 times, as we had said before. The police and fire department were here last week, as you recall. And so the first meetings are going to be in August and early September, and that is an overview of the department services and high-level budget dollar summary by different areas to give you some context of how much of the budget and the property tax levy is allocated to all of the different departments. And then they will be coming back, and the second meeting will be middle to late September. They'll come back through. And based on kind of the discussion tonight and the committee's preliminary tax levy recommendation and revenues recommendation and what the council approves, you will be asking for budget reduction options for specific dollar amounts from each department before they come. And so then the departments will come to the meetings and will share and discuss budget reduction options with the committee to meet those dollar amounts and outline the consequences and trade-offs for the different options that they're presenting. And then they will come back again in October to finalize those so that the committee can kind of finalize these different scenarios that you'll be presenting to the council. So I just want to make sure everyone was clear about the process that we're on to meet the timeline. And then tonight's going to be a discussion about the preliminary tax levy and revenues and the engagement plan, some more details about that. Next week will be 3 departments, Parks and Rec, Community Development, and Community Services. And then the week following that will be Public Works. And then after that, Monday, August 31st is when the co-chairs will present to the council a recommendation for a preliminary tax levy. So that's a big date. And then finishing up the first round of meetings will be September 2nd with admin, legal, and finance. And then September 9th will start those second round of meetings where reduction options will be presented, starting with police and fire. On September 14th, that is a city council regular business meeting where they will hopefully be approving a preliminary tax levy that we do have to submit to Hennepin County by the end of September. And then just going on and through September with the second meetings of the departments coming back, talking about presenting budget reduction options for the committee to consider. And we'll have another update to the city council from the committee on the progress. And then when we get into October, those are the third meetings. We do have one week between now and November that we don't have a meeting, which is October 14th, one Wednesday. And towards the end of October, then we'll be finalizing those different scenarios for the council and talking about those along the way, so that November 4th would be the date that we're heading, is the goal to finalize the maybe 3 to 4 budget scenarios for the city council. And then it goes to the city council, and that will be presented to them November 9th at a regular business meeting. And then these are city council dates, they'll have some time to discuss these budget scenarios throughout November, along with some other budgets that they'll be approving. And then we have scheduled December 7th is a truth and taxation public hearing. And then we have Monday, December 21st would be the date where the council would approve the final tax levy. So just to map out, we do have a full schedule, but just the process of it and how we have it laid out. Are there any questions?
If you could go back maybe three slides that shows let's see, this one actually, one more backwards here. Okay, so one thing that's kind of in the committee's control is that if we're diligent about having conversations as we go along here, it's very possible that that October 28th meeting could potentially be our last meeting where we make the final set of recommendations and send them to the council. So I think when we had conversations about this process initially, we wanted to have this meeting, and then if there were questions that we needed to get answered, we would have another meeting scheduled after that. But I just want to say that if folks are diligent about asking questions as we're going along and getting the information that they need, it's very possible that in that meeting in October would be the final meeting of the committee.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Let me first say to the committee, thank you, because I know this is not the schedule that was sold to you when you agreed to do this. We had talked about every other week, and only when we got into it and started plotting this out did the number of meetings multiply. So thank you for your forgiveness on that. It's always, I don't like to ask for forgiveness instead of permission, but in this circumstance, it's where we are. The other thing I'd like to say is that I'm a little hopeful here that as we get into the back half of this calendar, we may not have to meet weekly. And Kari and I can talk to the co-chairs about that too. Staff had a lengthy discussion this afternoon about the budget process. And these third meetings with departments, I think we may not need to do as in depth, depending on how this plays out. Because I know there's going to be some desire to have some strong staff recommendations, and I think that maybe we can work through some of this without having to do really, really lengthy meetings here. So over the next couple of weeks, staff will work with co-chairs here and try to refine the schedule a little bit and try to ease up here. But we do have a lot of work ahead of us, and I think the most intense of that is going to happen in the month of September and maybe early October. But I recognize that you're putting in above and beyond what was asked of you, and I thank you for that. And we're going to do this with as much haste as we can.
Thank you. Any other questions of the staff here? Okay, Kari, anything else?
No, that is all for item 4.1.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to item number 4.2, the discussion of revenues and preliminary tax levy. And just to frame this up a little bit, between now and when we're reporting to the City Council, we have two meetings that potentially we can have a conversation about this. My hope is that tonight we're largely able to get to the point where we know where we're going to end up on that 4.2 item, so that we can take that, not necessarily spend a lot of time on it next time, and be in a position to report that out to the council. That said, though, if folks have questions that can't be answered at the meeting, I think we want to be open-minded to the idea that it comes back. But what I would like folks to do as they're participating in this conversation is to see if we can try to drive things toward having a consensus around what the answer is going to be tonight in order to get that decision made. So just with that little bit of context, I'll hand it over to the staff to make the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to lead off, and then Kari will get into the PowerPoint. The document that we distributed before the meeting this evening, the one that's titled Preliminary Tax Levy Discussion, I thought it would just be good to try and put in one place here what we've been talking about over the last several weeks. First of all, a reminder that the committee agreed to the revenue-based approach, so what we need to do is define what is the most expected revenue scenario or scenarios, and then build our budget recommendations around those scenarios. So our objective for the discussion this evening is to determine the revenue scenarios that will frame the future committee recommendations, or at least that's our hope for by the end of the evening. We've been sharing with the committee the various revenues, so there's a good understanding of the general fund revenues that we're talking about. Those are generally in 4 groups: property taxes, which I think you're all familiar with; other taxes, lodging and admissions, which has garnered a lot of attention so far, as those are the ones that have been reduced dramatically this year and will be reduced dramatically next year, which is causing a lot of the pressure on the budget. Operating and service revenues. So these are things like business license for liquor licenses, tobacco licenses, building permit fees, fines, recreation program participation fees. And then the other category, we have a long list of other revenues that come from intergovernmental sources, grants that we receive from the federal or state government, interfund transfers from other city funds. Those are all segmented in a different group. So I thought it'd be good to help visualize where the volatility is in our revenues. And so we've used the old stoplight approach here, right? Flashing red is generally bad. Yellow is caution, and green is, proceed ahead comfortably. Other taxes, frankly, are the most vulnerable ones. And as a result of the pandemic and our resulting global economic slowdown, the dramatic impact on travel and hospitality industries, we've obviously seen a huge impact in this area, and we're forecasting that it's going to continue to be highly volatile into 2021. So when we look at our revenue scenarios, this is frankly the one that keeps us up at night, and it keeps our work group, the finance and development team busy on a weekly basis, looking at what's going on in the economy and what Congress is doing to try and figure out where this might head, and frankly, what's happening with the pandemic, because that's not becoming more clear at this point. In the yellow category, that's what we'd call the moderate volatility, are operating and service revenues. And the couple that I really want to point out here: building permit fees. We get quite a bit of money for building permit activity, and thus far that has held pretty steady during the pandemic. And the fact is that residential development, especially multifamily residential development in Bloomington, continues to be very strong. We are seeing hints in other places that this may start to decline. Some of the communities where you're seeing a lot of new housing starts, the ex-urban communities, Lakeville, Woodbury, you're starting to see single-family residential building numbers going down a little bit. Our situation is a little bit different. We don't have single-family new residential development opportunity. We're almost exclusively looking at multifamily residential. And as of right now, that's holding. One of the things that we saw in the last recession was how hard hit the construction and development industry was. And so that's one that we're keeping an eye on going into 2021 if we start to see some decline in the current momentum that we have there. The other area that I would point to is the business license fees. If we continue to see our current economic conditions persisting for quite some time, I think that we are looking at even more business closures or business failures, especially in the restaurant industry. And so liquor license revenue, if those businesses were to go out, would decline. And then finally, the program registration. So depending on what happens with the pandemic and the guidelines around congregating, if we're unable to offer programs in person, that has an effect on our registration fee revenue. The two that are in the green category, the property taxes, and you may say, well, geez, Jamie, that's pretty volatile this year, and it is, because we had a pretty unique situation this year forcing delinquencies that I do not expect to be the case next year. We're all hoping that I'm not wrong on that, or that the rest of our team is not wrong. But the fact is that even during the Great Recession, we saw very little uptick in our property tax delinquencies. So we've shared with you before that all 47 of our hotels are now current on their property taxes. That's good news. We only have one large property taxpayer that is working through their delinquency right now. And so a lot of this issue for 2021 is going to depend on that situation, frankly. Once the council sets the property taxes, the collection rate, we budget at about 98.7%, and that's what we have built into the budget for next year. The other revenues are also really stable, tend to be because the state and federal grants or intergovernmental aids are either multi-year contracts or multi-year commitments by statute, and so we don't see a lot of volatility in those areas. So if you go over to the second and the third page, Kari's going to work through this a little bit more in her presentation, but I just wanted to frame it up for you here. So our best case assumption that our working group has come up with is about a $1.7 million reduction from what we had budgeted this year. And they've looked at 2021, and then they see improvements in 2022. So that $1.7 million total reduction becomes a much more manageable number than we've been talking about in the best case. This obviously assumes, you see one of the notes there is that there's a vaccine that comes in third quarter or so of 2021, that we start to develop some herd immunity, and the pandemic becomes less of a concern, and business starts to rebound. The moderate case assumption is recently rebranded. We were calling this the most likely assumption before, based on how this was tracking with the current events. So, you always put one in the middle, right? So this is the one that's in the middle. There's one on either side. We'll call this the moderate one. This one has about $3.3 million total reduction. Kari, I have to ask, is this before or after that last adjustment? I think this was before, so we're at maybe 3.7, right? Because the moderate got a little bit worse.
That's correct.
Yeah. So 3.7 million in total reduction. That was just because the team met yesterday and updated this before we could update this spreadsheet. And then the last page is the worst case assumption is about $4.9 million in total reduction. And so there you see for the whole year of 2021, our lodging is off almost 50%, and our admissions is down by 2/3. Again, most of our admissions are generated by activities at Mall of America and a couple of properties around Mall of America. So a lot of the admissions forecast depends on how much throughput of people, frankly, that those entertainment venues can manage in the current environment. So I think the team, based on the information that we have today, and this information has been pretty consistent from week to week, we're pretty confident that these three scenarios are in the ballpark, right? So Kari's going to work through her presentation, and what we want you to be doing is thinking about where your comfort level is in the assumptions we're going to make about these revenue scenarios, and then we will put those side by side with our tax levy discussion so that you can see quite a different range of possibilities. What we really want to get out of this conversation tonight, again, is the recommendation, or at least a good ways toward the recommendation to the council for the preliminary tax levy. So even though we'll be looking at some of the different revenue scenarios, we're not focused on the number or the target just yet. We're focused on where you're comfortable making a recommendation on the tax levy, but you'll be able to see some of those impacts. So I'm going to stop talking, unless anybody has questions specifically about what you saw in here before we go to the presentation.
Maureen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, the information that you based the lodging scenarios and admissions, where did you get that from I know there are industry reports, the Star Report, Smith Travel, that kind of thing. But what else went into your factoring on this?
Both of those reports for sure that we get. And Kari, do you have the full list of sources that they're using? It's many. So we're not just resting on just a couple.
I don't have them right here, but we can get that information put together.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Jamie, and for the rest of the group, just one thought, and then I'll be quiet for a while. This is such a significant part of the budget, the revenues that we're going to have to address. But one missing piece of information or presentations that we have not heard or seen from is the Convention and Visitors Bureau that really drives hospitality and tourism in our city. So it would be, just for my sake, potentially, I don't know about the rest of the commission, but really what is their kind of outlook and focus, and what are they going to do to look for different sources of revenue to offset some of this lodging tax deficit? I mean, they can become very creative. So I just noticed going through everything that this is one of the biggest pieces, but yet the one who's driving it, we haven't heard from.
Chairs and committee members, Maureen, we can figure out a way to get input from Bonnie and her team over there. I will tell you that our team is in regular contact with them, so the information we're getting, in addition to those industry sources, is coming through the staff at CVB. So they're feeding their numbers into our process. If I heard part of your question, though, right, it's what's the CVB strategy for trying to accelerate the rebound and recovery, some of their marketing plans or some of those other things. And we can certainly inquire with them to see if they're doing anything specifically focused in that area. I think right now, I'm on the board of that organization. Co-chair Steve Peterson is also on the board. I think right now they're still in the triage and slow build back from where they're at, and trying to figure out where the future is at too. So I don't think they have anything specific. Steve, are you recalling anything that I may have missed at the last discussion?
They and just to be clear, I left that board at the end of the year. So
That's right.
That's why I'm not appearing.
I was wondering why you weren't talking much at the.
That's right. I wasn't talking much because I wasn't there. But just more directly to Maureen's question, from a data collection perspective, they really rely on that Smith Travel research. Data is kind of their primary data metric for things. One thing that would probably be very convenient to get from them would be the marketing plan and whatever sort of kind of marketing plan updates they've provided to their board, because I'm sure that they've provided that. And maybe we can go and ask them to provide some information that we could distribute to the committee members on that topic. But I think in terms of forecasting, they've never run what I would call a robust forecasting operation there. They've typically relied on the same industry sources that the staff is relying on now. So I think we're kind of going to the same place that they would go get the data to be able to do that. The one other comment, and I just wanted to follow up on Maureen's comment a little bit, is I'm not sure in terms of setting the preliminary levy it's important, but in terms of looking at particularly the best case assumptions, is I'm having a really hard time kind of getting my mind around the kind of best case 80% in first quarter, second quarter kind of thing. And the reason for that is I think about the kind of lead time of the meetings part of the hotel business and kind of people making decisions right now. Because of the stuff that I do related to high school robotics, I have visibility into kind of planning for that and that's like a first and second quarter of next year activity. And there's still an enormous amount of flux around that. And I have a hard time, even in a best case scenario, with things like football being canceled and all the fall sports being canceled and things like that, to see how people are going to make decisions to arrange particularly kind of meeting and group business that would land in the first and second quarter. I think if things start to get better, people will start working on that, but that typically has like a 6 month to year kind of lead time. And so it's more of a timing thing around that number is where I have a little bit of a question mark in my head about that.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I would think the only the only place where I'd still have some optimism around that first or second quarter of seeing the industry rebound is if a lot of those conferences or exhibits or trade shows haven't yet canceled simply because at this point they were hoping that there'd be a vaccine or that it would have been mitigated. I think we're getting to the point where you're going to start seeing mass cancellations of 2021 events.
Yeah,
So
so I think
probably-
people are at the point where, for space for next year for stuff, people are starting to expect deposits, early registration. And you think about like the National League of Cities meetings that the city folks go to is typically for that April meeting or the March meeting. You're typically buying travel and stuff like that in December in order to get that lined up and getting things going. And so that's the thing that I'm thinking about is just how that's going to end up lining up. Other questions or comments before we go on?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Neil.
you bring up a very interesting point, and is that 80% lodging and admissions in the first quarter even realistic? I'm not questioning the staff's approach to it, but Steve brings up a very valid point that in January and February of next year, the hotels are going to be 80% full, and where's that going to come from?
I would, if you want me to put different monikers on each of these scenarios, I'd call that the rose-colored glasses assumption.
Okay.
And I don't, one of the things, just to follow up on your comment, Neil, is I don't think tonight we're necessarily having to accept this as a final thing. Really, my goal for tonight is more of is to kind of look at the shape of these three options and then decide where our kind of worst case is, because that's really what's going to drive the preliminary levy conversation that we take to the city council. We'll have time to tweak these other things, and as more information comes in, make the forecast be better as we go along. Unless there's another question, then I'll hand it back to Kari to go ahead with her presentation.
All right. So this is the presentation that we had published in the agenda with some additional slides. So we did some printouts of additional information just to get the information and put it together so it's easier to look at all in one spot instead of flipping between the different options. So hopefully that will be helpful. And then, so you have that access to that presentation, and that's going to get published tomorrow on our website. That's for the Community Budget Advisory Committee as well as with the official agenda for tonight. So what we are going to go through is just to give some context of the history of the preliminary and the final tax levy increases over the past few years, current assumptions that we have right now in this levy, this model we're working on. We'll talk about the lodging and admission tax projections, which is a big part of it. The different revenue projection impacts then on the tax levy, and general fund expense budget broken out by department, and discussion of preliminary tax discussion to the city council August 31st. So this is a slide which I think we've looked at before, but just wanted to demonstrate. This starts with 2020 and goes back to 2008, where the preliminary tax levy column is on the left with the total tax levy, and then the final tax levy is on the right of that, those dollars. And often it will be a higher number that is set, and then staff will work with city council to bring that down. So for example, the 2020 tax levy, the preliminary was set at a 6% increase over 2019, but the final was a 4.75% increase over 2019. And if you take the average of the percentages there, the preliminary is about 4.59%, and then the final tax levy increase at 3.7%. And I'll just highlight, if you look around like 2011, 2012, and the preliminary was actually, a little less, it was flat, it went down a little bit, and that's after the Great Recession. And a lot of different strategies were put in place then to keep the tax levy down. We used internal service fund reserves. We brought those down pretty low and held positions open, did not have any cost of living adjustments. So a lot of the same things that we are doing now, but now the impact of the lodging and admission tax revenue is even greater. But so that's some history.
Kari, before
Yes.
you move off that one.
Yes.
I appreciate your hitting some of the highlights here. Two, maybe three stories that I want the committee just to keep in mind here. One, it's not unusual to have a higher preliminary levy than the final levy. And the whole point is about providing some flexibility in those final 3 months. We often don't get a lot of the information to make really accurate forecasts for the coming year, especially in the area of revenues, until the last couple months right before the budget is concluded. So the practice of having a higher preliminary is just to provide that flexibility. The second thing Kari mentioned was the numbers related to the Great Recession from 8 until about 14, 15. You see those are pretty low numbers. Again, that was the slow build back and recovery from the Great Recession. The higher levy numbers have been, to Kari's point, of trying to build back a lot of the internal services that, frankly, that's how they got through the recession, was to hold down some of those funds. And it was building some of those back up, and you went through those funds a couple weeks ago. The last thing I wanted to point out is that number in 2017 of 7.72%. That seems like a really big number, and we ended up at 5.75, which is a pretty big number. That was the year that the Mall of America TIF 1 came back onto the tax rolls. So the impact of the levy in 2017 was actually still a reduction for the median value home. So when you see that big levy increase, there's a story that's different about the impact to the homeowner. So numbers tell a story, and then there's usually some other story that goes with the numbers, right? So I want to make sure that you understand the history of the levy over the course of time. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Jamie.
Just one other point I'll point out is when you look at these percentages, you have to take into account inflation that occurred during that period, which is hidden inside those numbers. The other thing you have to do is that the taxable base of property in the city grows as there's new construction, and this is overall property. So if there's more property in this city, that dollar amount gets levied over a larger number of parcels. And so it's important to take that. When you look at these numbers at first, you can say, boy, those are big numbers. But if you net inflation out of it and you net growth from new property values out of it, that's a more realistic sense of kind of tax valuation changes here. Go ahead, Neil.
I didn't realize we had that much inflation during that period of time.
It's like 1 or 2%. So if you look at,
And secondly, we had a big increase in the valuation of property during that period of time. So we've had a historic number of about 5% the last 4 or 5 years. At the same time, the assessed valuation of buildings and residents has gone up, so the taxpayer is paying a larger percent on a larger number. So, I mean, just to your comment, it's not been a static, and it's been a healthy increase for the last 5 or 6 years, given the increase in values, some inflation, and a 5% rate, and yet the council was very anxious about the fact that you used a number of 8%.
that was
It made too surprised.
We're not enthusiastic about that number. So, okay, you can go ahead.
These are the assumptions that we have in the tax levies that we're going to talk through, different options for tax levy. We have the Normandale Lake tax abatement reduced by $650,000. So that was the $950,000 that we've reduced down to $300,000 for a couple years, which is sufficient for what those needs are in Normandale Lake area. And then the funding for the pool vessel, not having that anymore in the tax levy, which was part of the tax levy for aquatics fund. So that was a $663,000 reduction. So between those two, that's about 1.3 million. And then the current budget projections for 21 and also for 22, there's no cost of living increases for most employees, except for not for the non-union and any open bargaining units that are currently under contract bargaining units that are currently under negotiation. So there's not a cost of living increase for most employees. The internal service fund charges, even though there's other things that are increasing their expenses, we're holding those charges flat, so it's kind of using some of the reserves in some cases. And then the debt service portion of the tax levy, we're going to use a portion of the PIR debt fund, the permanent interest revolving fund, to help with that additional debt service that we expect. So instead of increasing the tax levy for the additional debt service, we'll use some of that, which can only be used for debt service. And then, of course, the other assumption is a significant decline in lodging and admission tax revenue.
Question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Neil.
On the employee numbers of the cost of living, how many bargaining unit employees are there? And how many employees are there? And how many of those are in bargaining units so that the cost of living freeze applies to what % of the staff?
Roughly, we have 580 FTEs, full-time employees in this year's budget. Approximately 1/3 of our workforce is in a bargaining unit.
Okay.
There's that 1/3 is spread over 5 different bargaining units, and 2 of the 5 units we have signed contracts that obligate us to pay increases in 21. So the first one represents 98 employees, and the second one represents 23 employees. So we have 121 employees who have a signed collective bargaining agreement, or if we're fully staffed. There's always some vacancies, but out of about 580, so about 20% of our workforce, we have signed contracts that call for pay increases in 21.
Did I see somewhere in reading, and I don't know where it was, but I thought I read somewhere one of the major cities in Minnesota had an agreement from one of their bargaining units to stand by on increases. Was that Duluth, maybe?
It was the AFSCME units in Duluth.
In Duluth.
Agreed to several.
And who had enough intestinal fortitude to bring that up? The manager, or where did that come from? Or just because being good people? Or?
My understanding, I don't know anybody personally in Duluth. I've been following it in the news, they're facing a similar magnitude drop in revenue as we are. And they were able to persuade those bargaining units to.
Is that a question that anybody could bring up, or is that hallowed ground?
We're just having that discussion this afternoon. It's usually best not to discuss our collective bargaining strategy in a public meeting,
Okay, I
but
understand.
we're looking at all options.
Okay.
Akia.
Thanks, Chair Peterson. I have a question about this as well. Historically, for the 2/3 that are non-represented, what's the cost of living increase? And then do the employees, whether they're represented or not, receive step increases annually?
We do have a pay structure for our employees that includes step increases. And so you move from one step to the next, generally based on years of service. Those are not annual, though. So, for example, most of our non-union wage scales call for step increase through your 5-year anniversary. And then after that, there are no more step increases. So you would just be getting the cost of living increase. So under this scenario, there are some employees that would get a step increase because one is called for based on their years of service. There are other employees who are not due a step increase, and therefore, without a cost of living increase, their wages would remain flat for 21.
And then what is like a 2% or 1% cost of living typically?
You know, it varies. I would say if you ask most public employees, they would say 3% is just sort of the norm or the number that comes to mind. We have history of doing 2.5 or 2 or 3.5 occasionally, either in good years or when we find that we're slipping behind other employers that we view ourselves as competing with for good talent. But I would say the most common normal number would be a 3%. And that's what we're settled with for our police officers and police supervisors. Their signed contracts grant them a 3% cost of living increase on January 1st.
We also have a strong history of internal equity, so non-union employees are typically getting a cost of living increase very similar, if not the same, as what the collective bargaining units have received.
And just to follow up on that, because I'm not a city staff member and not involved in the collective bargaining, so I can talk about it, is that based on history, that the groups that did, there's groups that got an increase in this cycle, and clearly in the conversation we're talking about, there's groups that did not. There will be a lot of pressure for that to be made good at some point in the future, so that there isn't a gap that opens up there. I don't think it's going to be in this budget cycle, but just from a equity perspective, the expectation will be at some point that gets trued up by the council when the time is appropriate. So I don't think I would support doing that in this budget cycle because of the pressure that we have. But I think that we shouldn't think that that gap is gonna stay open forever, because it's just not an expectation that we can have. John, you had a question.
Chris, how long is the contract for with the police?
It was a 2-year contract, so for 2020 and 2021, and they were both signed prior to March 15th.
So they were working without a contract for a period of time?
Relatively, yeah, I would say that's pretty good to have the contracts done in the first quarter of the year. It's pretty typical for us not to have them in place when they expire on December 31st.
So that'll cover 2021, but 2022 is fair game
2022,
again.
we have no settled contracts.
Okay, thank you.
Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, Jamie. So minus the police, and what are the other contracts that are going to be up for negotiations?
Sure. So we have 3 other contracts. One would be our dispatchers union, and they are settled for 2020, but not anything beyond this year. That was settled this spring post-pandemic. And then we have 2 ASME units. One represents our assistant city attorneys, and one represents staff in the community development department. Those 2 unions are still working without a contract. We have mediation scheduled with both of those groups in September to try to reach a contract agreement.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other questions, so we can go ahead.
So this is an additional slide that we added just to, as we get into the different projections for 2021 lodging and admission tax, this is what we've seen so far for 2020. So when you look at lodging tax that was collected January through June, because we collect it monthly, so we've collected through June. So 2019 was 4.2 million almost, and then only 1.6 million for this year. And there are 7 hotels that have not paid their June lodging tax that was due in July, and 3 of those hotels have not paid lodging tax from February through June. For admission tax, last year, January through June, 852,000 about. And then for this year, $303,470. All the admission establishments are current with paying admission tax up until June, that was due last month. And then when we look at it for just the second quarter, so that's really, January and February this is before the impacts of COVID were really felt. So April, May, and June, just second quarter, the lodging tax was 2.3 million. In 2019, it was only 298,000 for 2020, so down 87%. And then admission tax, actually the admission establishments were not open from I think all of that period or most of it. So it was down 92%. We did have some delinquent payments that came in. So that's right now. And this is the same information that Jamie had gone over, just talking about like setting up this worst case scenario, like where you see like the Mall of America reopening again. That's in the scenario that it gets there's a flare up and things start shutting down again in this worst case scenario. And these are the slides that Jamie went over before as well.
Question,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. Is it safe to assume then if you've had that big drop for, let me see here, from in the second quarter, April, May, June, that we'll probably see the same thing July, August, September? So that number is going to get bigger than we've ever talked about, isn't it?
So Chair Peterson and committee members, the trends are it is coming back slightly as we so we're we're watching it, and we have even for 2020 we also have this best case, worst case, most likely case scenario, and it is coming up slowly. Okay. So it's just a matter of watching that closely and being in contact with the different industry experts and being in contact with the Visitors Bureau.
Follow up. Is that a delinquency accessible?
The property tax delinquency?
Or the lodging tax?
Or the lodging tax.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking the question, if the hotels can't pay that and they're in trouble, they may be in trouble with their mortgage.
Right.
And so if there is some kind of a perfection goes on the mortgage, do we have a claim or are we just out?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, Co-Chair Peterson, we had this conversation a couple months ago, and my recollection is that it is not accessible under Minnesota state statute. And so, if there were to be some sort of workout, I think we'd be at the end of the line on trying to collect on these. That's just for the lodging tax. Obviously, the property tax is different.
Okay.
Yes,
It's a big number.
Chair Peterson and committee members, I think we would have our city attorney would be involved and see what our options were.
And the other note to your question, Co-Chair Peterson, about the third quarter maybe looking like the second quarter, I think our hotels are at about 35% occupancy right now. So it's they're slowly coming back, but it's a lot better than what was in the second quarter. I mean, there were in those first couple of weeks they were hovering in the single digits for occupancy, and then in the teens for the better part of another month after that. So they're slowly putting more people into the rooms.
There are cars in the parking lot now when there weren't any cars. Maureen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, Carrie. It's very concerning to see that 7 hotels have not paid their lodging tax, which says there's some serious things going on. And will that carry on further, and will the tab keep on adding up? So my concern is, again, looking at your best, moderate, and worst case scenarios, just after seeing this, that worst case scenario is kind of where I'm going to be going to, frankly. We also have to take in consideration these people. Yes, we have occupancy at 35%, which is good. But what is the RevPAR and what is the average daily rate? That is key, because that is going to determine what that lodging tax is. And what is coming into the city of Bloomington right now, unless I'm mistaken, because we're seeing it in Dakota County, it's mini stay vacations. Families are staying close to home. They're maybe going to a hotel and, touring the area, that kind of thing. So those rates, those occupancy rates are significant, or the RevPAR rates are substantially lower than that of the business rate. And that adds to the question, business travel is not anticipated to come back for 3 to 5 years. And that is where we make the money in the lodging business, is the transient business traveler. That is where the money is to be made. So again, I appreciate the best and moderate case, but with all these factors coming in and looking at already delinquencies of lodging tax, I think we have to look at the worst case scenario.
Most of the hotels make their money Monday through Thursday.
Yep.
All right. And we, Maureen, when we put together some more detailed information for the committee about the industry sources, we also have the RevPAR information that we're getting, and we'll share that too. All right. So based on these projections that we're looking at, and as we get more information, we are changing those as we get the better information. This is what we have as modeling for the budget for 21 for revenues. So the worst case, it's a 47% reduction in lodging and a 66% reduction in admission, and that's 5.1 million. The moderate case is 6.3 million, and then the best case is 8.3 million. So still, best case, still a reduction from what we would typically have for our pre-COVID levels, but still, but only a 20% and a 15% reduction. And this slide has a new slide that I added for tonight is this is just the general fund. And these are different revenue scenarios when you factor in what we were just looking at on the last slide with the best case, moderate case, worst case for lodging and admission. So the lodging and admission taxes are at the top, those top two rows, and as you go across, depending on the amount that we can project that we would receive, and keeping the other ones for this presentation the same, the net effect is that if we are trying to get to 81.2 million, then the revenue number, if we were just trying to solve that all with property taxes, that's that red line at the bottom would have to increase. So for the best case scenario, it would be 56.9 million for just the general fund, and then the worst case would be 60.2 million. And yes.
I really like this chart. Thank you, Kari, for putting it together, because the memo that we walked through had the 4 different groups. This kind of breaks it out into these different groups. So one of the ways to look at this chart, if you look at that bottom line, the 81.2 million, that's what we have in his budget request for this year. That's the expenditure side. Okay. So if you take all of the other black shaded numbers, those are the non-property tax revenues, right? So after we're done forecasting what those are, the red number, your property tax, essentially becomes your plug number to bridge the difference. Okay. So what happens is we take that property tax and we figure out what the rate or the percentage of the tax levy increase is. And if that's not an acceptable number, the red number has to come down. And so then black numbers have to change as well, right? So you can either change the bottom line to match the reduction in the property taxes. So you'd pull down the expenditure side. You can adjust revenues. Now, there's a consequence if you're going to increase the non-property tax revenues to offset reduction in property taxes, and that's if you miss, you have a shortfall during the budget year, right? So we try to be conservative on the non-property tax revenues that we forecast, because if we estimate those badly, then we end up short at the end of the year. So there is room to move the other revenues around. It's just that's a yellow light on the red, yellow, green light.
Neil.
Question. You said you have to move the red number, the taxes in the general fund. And then you use the comment, if that is acceptable. And so my question, acceptable to whom? Or to reality? Can you help me differentiate those two?
So, Mr. Co-Chairs and committee members, what you'll see in a couple slides here is how the property tax number that's here is reflected in the property tax levy increase. Okay, and the question that you're going to wrestle with is what's the recommendation to the council? I didn't hear in the conversation a couple weeks ago that there was a lot of interest in doing this number. So the red number here would have to come down. So this is currently in the worst case scenario, the $60.2 million. That's where we're at, that 7.5 or so
Yep,
right now,
that's the
right?
next
And
slide
that's the
here.
next slide.
Yeah.
Look at that. Great question, Neil. Your timing is fantastic.
She's reading my mind.
And so these are the slides that I had put together. They've changed a little bit with our updated projections, but I have a worst case and a moderate case and a best case, and I won't go through all of these in great detail, but I did want to just I'll kind of go through these quickly, and then I have one where it's all together. I think it'll be easier to digest it and compare. But what I did want to highlight on what we're looking at on these different charts, and this one has the worst case scenario, is that in the pink column is the 2020 tax levy. So we levied, almost $65 million that's the current 2020 tax levy. And then it's showing the allocation of how that is split up. So 5.4 million of that is for debt service. And then the other areas are, not debt service. The vast majority of it is the general fund, which is 54 million. And then there are some other funds we've talked about as well that also receive property tax support. And so that was 2020. And then the green section is the 2021 tax levy, different options for tax levy. And so the 2021 tax levy dollar change is comparing the general fund, it's comparing the different allocations, like the general fund there for the 2021 tax levy compared to 2020. So for the different categories, you can see like motor vehicle, we are showing that we need another $100,000. So the tax levy for motor vehicle would go from $125,000 up to $225,000. But then we also show there for the aquatics fund goes down $663,000 as we talked about earlier, and then the Normandale, the tax abatement district. So, and then in the purple, that shows the median value home, and it shows what the monthly city tax portion would be. So at a 7.59% tax levy increase overall, that would go to $95.94 per month for the median value home, which would be an increase of $6.21 per month. And I also have on this slide kind of the assessing property value changes for 21 compared to 20. And for 21, the single family residential is basically flat, where others have increased. And so that's why it's showing that if there's a tax levy percent change, an increase of 7.59%, then it would be a 6.92% increase for taxes because of how the tax burden is shifting. And then in the lower right-hand corner, that is showing if the gap. So what that means is right now it's showing a 7.59% tax levy increase. If we wanted to decrease that down to 7%, we'd have to take out $382,000. If we needed to reduce it all the way to 0%, so there's no tax levy increase, there's $4.9 million that we would have to reduce in expenses. So I have this worked up this is the worst case, meaning the lodging and admission tax worst case scenario.
Can I interrupt and have you go back for just a second?
Yes.
So because the levy number is necessarily the plug, kind of the variable that we're solving for in this, one of the things to think about is Kari goes through these is likely in just a moment when we start talking about the preliminary levy, this slide is going to be the slide that we're focusing on, and we're going to be digging a little bit more into the assumptions on that. And then in that table in the lower right-hand corner there with those percentages, that's what we're going to be looking at and selecting a number out of that table as that preliminary levy, because the worst case scenario is the one that we want to have as that's going to create the maximum amount of levy. And so as we come back to this is the place where we're going to be spending the time having that conversation. Go ahead. Neil.
I think you've probably answered this question for me, but I'm going to maybe have to review it. I'm looking over at the assessing property value changes, and there's very little change in the family residential, but there's 8 and 9% in condos and apartments. And that's the result of the assessing department coming up with the value of those properties based on their revenue flow and other factors. So I would read that if we raise this $5 million, that most of it's going to come out of condos and apartments?
Mr. Co-Chairs, committee members, that's just demonstrating the change in value for that class. What you can take away from that is looking at multifamily as opposed to single family is where you see the tax burden shift going to. So one of the charts that I think we've shown in the past here, like several meetings ago, we might want to bring it out again. It shows the commercial, industrial, and the residential tax, and then it shows whether there's strength and weakness in those various, or if they're balanced, right? So this year I would say it's more of a balanced year for single family and commercial industrial, but there's a real imbalance because the values are increasing in multifamily residential. And so when the pie gets cut up at the beginning of the year for who's taking the burden on the tax levy, the multifamily residential is going to have a bigger slice of that pie, right? So that's one of the reasons when we were walking through the information early in the demographics and trying to understand and that ability to pay situation, not just for single family homeowners, but also for renters, because property tax largely becomes a pass-through for multifamily property owners, is that each year the rent is adjusted, and it's usually adjusted upward because of increasing costs, whether it's utilities or taxes. So there will be an impact to the multifamily property taxpayer at a level that's greater than single-family residential. That's essentially what that's telling you.
It'll be interesting when we talk the next half of this meeting about the different populations that we're going to be interviewing, and if a large number of those populations are in multi-housing settings, they're going to get it.
I think one of the things that would be good for the committee to see as an additional bit of resource was a presentation that was made to the council and the HRA on Monday night of this week. They had a joint meeting, and they were talking about all things housing, but we started that conversation with a demographics overview too. So it included much of what we presented before, but it had some additional information as well. And so there's a lot of really rich data in there about who is cost burdened by housing in the community. And just to give you the quick summary is about 27% of households in Bloomington are cost burdened, and that phrase is very specific. So cost burden for housing is paying more than 30% of your income for housing. Okay? So about 27% of households in Bloomington pay more than 30% of their income for housing. For single family homeowners, that number is about 20%. For multifamily, so for renters, that number's about 43%. So what people are paying for rent, 43% of those people are paying more than 30% of their income.
This is the same chart, but what's changing is the factors that are plugging the general fund property tax number. So the moderate case scenario, it's a 5.75% tax levy change, and then a 5.08% increase for the median value home. And then this best case scenario, which we were talking about, is a 2.61% increase, or 1.94% to the median value home. And this chart just is showing where we are right now in 2020. For just the city tax portion, the monthly cost is $89.73. And if we go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4% increase, this is how that would change. So, like, for example, a 1% increase would be, actually 0% would be a reduction of $1.21 per month. 1% would be only a 26 cents reduction, and then 2% is 69 cents a month, and so on.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Neil.
I'm sorry, but and the tax burden part of our population, that number is far greater than in the median value home, given what we just heard on what they're paying for tax burden on their cost of living, occupancy.
No,
Or am I making a bad assumption?
the cost burden of, I'm trying to think through your question now. So
If this cost, the monthly cost, take the first number, $89.73, in a single-family house, and their cost burdened at about 20% of income, where a renter is cost burdened at 40%.
oh,
Can
yeah, okay. So I
I
understand.
use
the
that as a
question.
multiple?
No, so it's 43% of people are cost burdened.
43% are cost burdened.
Right, meaning that 43% of people are paying more than 30%.
Okay, that helps.
And 20% of homeowners pay more than 30% of their income. So
Okay.
if you're making $50,000 in income,
Yeah.
and your mortgage is, I shouldn't do math on the fly here, right? But so if your mortgage is more than $15,000 annually, then you're cost burdened.
Okay, that helps me a little.
Akia.
Chair Peterson, Carrie, I have a question. I think like maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 meetings ago, we were talking about this graphic.
Yes.
And Chair Peterson had a question about what it meant to have like a 10% increase over previous year's levy. And would that mean, so talking about it now, would it be that there'd be an additional $10 about, or $9 that people would pay per month if we were to increase, to meet the deficit by, is that making sense? I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Chair and committee members, Kuya. So right now, the highest we have right on here is 7.59%. And so that would be $6.21.
Right.
So if you continue to go up, it would be about, so if it was like 10%, it would probably be around $9 a month. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does, thank you.
Still a bargain.
So this slide is taking those 3 slides that we just looked at, which has lots of information, and just laying it out as the worst case, moderate case, best case, and the total levy. So to fully fund this levy, so the worst case would be $69.6 million, and then the best case $66.4 million, and then showing what the total tax levy increase would be for those 3 cases. and then the monthly impact on the median value home, monthly impact, and then how that translates to that percentage increase of property tax for the median value home. So that is if the city were to increase the levy for all the lost lodging and admission taxes revenue, as it says on that slide. And then what we have here is, so it's reductions necessary, we're saying, to balance the budget. So on the left, you've got the worst case, moderate case, best case, and just showing, so when Co-Chair Steve Peterson was commenting about that box in the corner of the slide where it was showing the gaps, so we have them all on the same slide here. So, for example, a worst case, if we're going with that worst case revenue scenario for lodging and admission tax, then we would need to reduce $4.9 million of expenses, services, and then it goes on. So 1% would have to be a reduction of 4.2 million, and then goes. If you get all the way up to 7%, that's a reduction of 382,000. So that's the worst case scenario. And then it has the same laid out for a moderate case, and the different tax levy increase options, and then that best case scenario.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Neil.
And this is, this again is if you just took the 20 budget, put it into 21. Just
Wait.
use the same number.
These are the same. So
This is the impact.
right. So Chair Peterson and committee members. So this is the budget request for 21, with that assumptions that we talked about earlier, where no cost of living adjustment,
Okay,
keeping
yeah.
things flat, trying to keep things, as flat as possible. And the real driver is that we have a major reduction of non-property tax revenue.
Okay. And
That's a good question, though, about what's the assumption on the 2021. Kari walked through some of those assumptions, but all of the department budget requests are in for 2021. So this reflects the budget requests as they stand today. And so the departments have already done some work in holding down their budgets, just knowing the situation that we're in. So they had some inputs that they didn't have any influence over. So the costs for employee benefits, the costs related to personnel, all of that was what we call preloaded in there. So they didn't have any discretion there. So all of the department requests that are in the budget are mostly on the operating aspects of the budget. So many of them have already held down the budget to begin with, knowing that we were in a tough situation. So.
I'll just react, Mr. Chairman. If I look up there and say the assumption on a monthly impact on the home is $6.21, that's $100 a year. That'd save our bacon. And I don't find that offensive.
That's what, sorry?
Huh?
What is that?
Well, go back up the slide just to back where she said
It's about $75 a year.
yeah,
Yep, $6 a month.
$6 a month to cure the problem. Can we sell that? It doesn't take care of Hennepin County or the schools.
Right.
I don't think the schools are going to see that much but the question is, can we sell the $6 a month? I'm in. I mean,
Co-Chair Peterson just saved us 2 months of meetings.
give me police and fire and plow my roads. I'm in. How do we sell that?
Well, I'll just, I'm going to jump ahead because I was done with the.
I'm sorry.
I'm just, that's where we were kind of at the point of to have this discussion about, are we picking the worst case, moderate, best case for the lodging and admission tax, and how much revenue shortfall do you want to make up with property tax revenue and recommend? So that's right where we're at.
Kari, can you go back those 2 slides? I think on a preliminary tax levy, Co-Chair Peterson's question is actually a reasonable question, right? Because what you're really doing with this preliminary tax levy discussion is you're framing the maximum amount that you're going to ask of residents for 2021, right? And I know there was some question about our community engagement coming up in September and what we're going to be asking of them. We're just a couple weeks away now from having a really good frame on what we're asking them. So when we are able to tell them, we think this is the maximum amount of a tax levy, this is the amount of money that we think that we have to reduce the budget by, that starts to frame up their choices, right? And so that's going to help with that engagement process to get feedback. So we're not trying to jump all the way to the end and decide on a number that we're going to sell to the council or that you're going to try to recommend to the council in November. What we're doing is saying, what's that top end, right? Because there's still a lot of information that we don't know and that we're going to learn over the next few months. What's going to happen with the economy? Is unemployment going to persist? How does that translate into people's personal economic situation? One thing that we haven't seen yet is foreclosure incidents rising. I mean, we're seeing a huge crisis in ability to pay rent, in the looming crisis related to evictions. Mortgage foreclosures take a much longer time. They evolve more slowly. We haven't started to see an uptick in that area. We don't know if we're going to yet, right? So that's, we have all of these questions about ability to pay that we're still going to learn a lot more. And that's why we're doing the community engagement, is to try and figure out what's that willingness or the pain tolerance is another way to say it for residents. What this also does, Kari, if you can go one more back to the one that has the three different ones showing the different level.
This one?
Yep, this one here. This will help, I think, really frame the discussion. So I've heard a fair amount of conversation. I don't want to assume a consensus here that, the worst case scenario is one that you want to be thinking about. The moderate case, remember I said this was staff's most likely, and we rebranded it as the moderate one, right? So I think reality lies between those two, right? So as we're thinking about what are the choices we're going to be making, whatever you recommend on the top end, then work your way down to where the council may end up being comfortable, and that's the range of options. So then once we finish this conversation, make a recommendation to the council, what staff will do is go back to the department directors and say, okay, here's our target, because our next conversation has to be where do you want to look at as a potential endpoint, right? So the way that we had framed it up for the directors before was we want you to come in with options for reductions that are probably going to exceed what the real reduction is going to be, so that the committee has choices, right? So this is going to help us give direction back to the department about what's the likely target going to be from the top end to the bottom end. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Kari, did you want to go back to those questions then, and we can look at that?
Yes. So first one is for the worst case, moderate, or best case, for what is the committee comfortable with for using for revenue scenario for the projection?
So is this question with respect to the preliminary levy, or is this question with respect to the three scenarios?
Chair Peters, I would say both.
Both, okay.
Right. Starting to look, coming to the different revenue scenarios, but then also based on that, and back at the slide we were just looking at, how that would determine a recommendation for a preliminary tax levy number.
Neil.
Help me think through the scenario. So the committee and the council picks the moderate. Just stay away from conflict, stay in the middle. But it doesn't happen that way. It happens the worst case. What happens in 21 when you end up short that $4 million and say, what were you guys thinking of? Shortfall?
Reserves or contingency.
You have them?
We do. So I shouldn't be so cavalier about saying we do. So the charter requires us to levy a certain amount for contingency in the budget. So there's always 2.5%, Lori, is that what that number is, right? So there's always that amount of money in our budget that's required by the charter. Our general fund reserve, you'll recall, for 2020, we are proposing to use that to cushion the shortfall this year. We're sitting at about 40% for our general fund reserve, and we're drawing that down to 35%, which is sort of the low end of where we're comfortable, but as importantly, where our bond rating agencies are comfortable. So, yes, reserves exist. If we go below 35%, that's when the alarm bells start going off.
For whom?
I would say for both the city and for the credit rating agencies, although I will tell you the credit rating agency is a long-term consideration.
I was going to say, it might be in this predicament. I don't care about the AAA right now. And going out there and fighting 80,000 citizens who are going to go crazy over this to protect the AAA rating. I don't care. That might be a small price to pay in a few interest dollars to.
Yeah, and I would say there's a real difference between using the reserve to deal with a current year shortfall as opposed to using the reserve to plug a gap in a next year's budget.
That's true.
Because what we're trying to do is stay away from one-time solutions. And essentially use of reserve in planning a budget would be doing that. And so it creates structural imbalance into the future years.
I've got John next and then Akia.
Great, thank you very much. Just a simple question. Those numbers earlier in terms of 2021 budget, if you will, after the departments got it, those bottom line numbers, did they assume the 35% or 45% contingency and reserve or a different number?
Yes. So for the budget request, we have it so with the working capital goal, the fund balance goal for the general fund is at 35% of the next year's revenues.
Okay.
So in the past, it's been between 35 and 40%. We've tried to be at that 40%, but we've brought it down to the minimum 35%. And that's what it's based on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Akia.
Thank you, Chair Peterson. I kind of forgot my original question, but my next question is a counter to Chair Peterson's comment about if we under predicted the future, couldn't we kind of balance that maybe by being more cautious and assuming the worst and meeting somewhere in the middle of the worst case scenario? And then if there happens to be a surplus, wouldn't that offset a future year's levy then? And we'd end up lowering it back down to something that's more reasonable? I guess this is a comment, question, or statement. No.
So each you can think of that as, if the city levies $10 million and spends $9 million. Let's say that or all of the revenue sources of the city generate $10 million and the spending is $9 million, then that $1 million carries over to the next year.
Right.
So you're right in that, to the extent that the reserve is filled to the point where it's at a necessary level. What the historic practice of the city has been is that it's gone in that strategic priorities fund, which effectively is a place where that kind of what's called positive performance gets kept and used for mostly one-time things, and not used for operating sorts of things. But I think that accurately covers how that goes together, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Peterson.
So when when I look at this here, my eye goes to, starting to have a conversation in kind of the gap between the worst case and the moderate case, and looking at the kind of 5 and 6% area there as the kind of place on here where my eye goes to start having a conversation in this table. And so I think the two questions I think that we're trying to answer tonight. Number one is, from a revenue perspective, are we going to take these three non-tax scenarios and use them as our kind of the inputs to that? I think we've had a little bit of conversation about the optimistic one and whether that's really a realistic optimistic one or if it's a unrealistic optimistic one. But I think we're going to, in terms of building the revenue thing, we're going to pick these three things, and then we're basically going to have to pick levy numbers for each one in order to come to a bottom line number. Then that is going to drive the expense side of the equation. So that's big picture. I think that's how we're going to get to our revenue scenarios. And so maybe if people want to talk a little bit about kind of their thoughts on accepting these three as the inputs on the non-property tax side of the three scenarios, and see if we can get a consensus around that would be a good step to try to take tonight. I think we have enough information to have that conversation tonight. Obviously, the staff continues to watch the situation, and we may get updates as time goes along, but there's a point where we've got to start making decisions on stuff, and I think with respect to this, we're close to that. Maureen?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Members, I took the time this weekend to watch the council meeting where Chair Peterson, Co-Chair Peterson presented. And when I heard the comments and the thoughts of our council members, it was very apparent that they were not going to accept anything even close to an 8% tax levy, if anything considerably lower. And my concern is, if that's kind of the feedback we're getting from the council, we're in a very difficult spot here, because they're kind of basically saying, we're not going to take a higher levy at 6, 7, 8%. And even the 4.75, I think some council members are wanting to see that even go lower. So then with that being said, how are we going to, how are the departments then going to have to go back and backfill and make their cuts? And, my concern is we're going to make these recommendations knowing that we're in a very difficult spot. Because I'll tell you, my gut feel is everything to me, and it's not, I try to be optimistic, but I'm leaning towards the worst case scenario. I just think there's so much unpredictability in our economy with the pandemic, where we're going with the upcoming elections. There is so much uncertainty that I think we have to be taking the worst case. I think it's the most financially prudent to take the worst case scenario, because if we do perform better, we're going to be better off versus hitting the moderate and keeping our fingers crossed in the roll of the dice. So I am leaning towards that worst case. And again, if the council's saying don't even bring an 8% or 7%, then we have to look at serious cuts within the budgets, and then what those priorities are for us. So,
John, is that your hand up again, or did it knock it
I
down?
took it down, put it back up. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you. I agree with much of what Maureen just said, but just to get focused, at least in my mind, is the question on the table right in this moment whether we agree on those three, lack of a better word, expense cuts. So we can at least cross those off the list, and we will have at least started the process of less expense on that side.
When you're saying three expense cuts, what are you meaning?
I'm thinking about the abatement district, the
Those are
pool,
the assumptions.
Oh, yeah.
if that's what you were asking.
Yeah. I think the sense I have from the group, and obviously you can disagree with me, but the sense I have at the group is that we've agreed that those things are something that we've agreed that we're going to put in, and that
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So we're done with those ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to clarify for the committee, if those were not in, it would be more like a 9% levy increase. So we're including that to bring it down to 7%. Or a little over 7%.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm going to have Jessica and then Akia.
Mr. Co-Chair, what the homework or what we have been assigned here from the beginning was to come up with the hard work to identify places that we can cut the budget. It wasn't assigned, okay, we are going to raise the levy and, everybody gets happy. So I relate when, a lot what happened at home. If I'm working and something come up as a family emergency, I don't go to my employer and say, I have this emergency, can I have a raise? That doesn't happen. So I have to tie my budget at home and trying to figure out what to do. So I recognize that this is very difficult, but that's the task that we signed for it. So we need to be clear that it's not the easy way to raise taxes because there are a lot of people that are in hardship right now, unemployment, and we don't know when it's going to take us. So yes, we need to agree to reduce somehow. I'm sure we have to raise the taxes somehow, but the first assignment is to clean house and then go out and ask for what we need. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, Akia.
Chair Peterson, thanks. I had a question. I think I missed it, but for our assumptions about the no cost of living increase, what would that bucket be for like the 400 or something employees that we're gonna hold steady or not give the cost of living increase to?
I don't think we've got calculated that. No.
Okay. And then my
Committee members, we could get that information about if there were.
But we don't have it.
Yeah, if there were a cost of living increase, how much that would be if there.
right, or what would we be saving for this assumption, I guess, to meet?
It's already baked in. So we've assumed
okay.
we've assumed no cost of
So
living.
we're having okay, got
Right.
Okay.
So if the end result was that we think that employees should be given a cost of living increase, then we'd have to calculate that number and add it back into the budget.
Got it. Perfect. And then my other question is about the burden if we were to increase the monthly dues, I guess, between like $5 and $10, what that scenario would look like for families. I guess I don't know if the community, what type of statistics we get, whether it's annually or biannually or something like that for employment and like the average or the median income. And so, or what the scenario looks like in response to COVID. So are people losing their jobs? Are they underemployed so that their incomes are all falling or whatnot? And so, sorry, this is a long-winded muddle question, but if we were to increase the budget by or somebody's burden by $5 to $10, it might be nothing. It could be a wash because you're not going to notice $5 to $10 every month, or it could be really significant because you lost your job or you're not getting paid as much as you were. So I guess how do we understand or factor in those scenarios is my question.
I think I'll give a shot at answering that. I think you have to assume that for some people, $6 a month is going to be in the noise in their situation. It's
Right.
not going to matter. And there's going to be other folks who are on $1,500 a month in Social Security, and it's going to be a big deal.
Right.
Okay. And just assume that that's the case. And the decision that we have to make is what we think is the right thing for the community as a whole, because we don't have the power to say, in that neighborhood over here with expensive houses, we'll give them $18 a month. I mean, the property tax system does this to a certain extent, but we don't have any influence over beyond what the property tax system does. And for the person who's in the apartment, we're going to, try and take that into account in our situation. We have this very coarse-grained lever of the total levy. And when I was on the council, I always used to talk about the retired school teacher who was in their house and thinking about, what does that person need, and thinking about the growing family who wants services, and maybe the retired school teacher wants to sell their house to the growing family, and if the community's not appealing to the growing family, then they don't get as much money, and that dwarfs the $6 a month that we're saving them. Because here's the other thing I would oftentimes think about is with homeowners, people, changes, relatively small changes in demand for houses, could easily be $1,000 or $2,000 in somebody's pocket, and that dwarfs, saving $5 or $10 for people. So it's not a simple thing, and there's no simple answer to the question I think you're asking.
No, of course not. So
Yeah.
that's what I was probably asking. But I guess my other thought or concern is that in all of this, we're also thinking about how we make sure we maintain the city of Bloomington as like a affordable or an enjoyable community for people on all, like, throughout the whole spectrum. So it could be a drop in a bucket, or it could be significant, and it could be that, oh, I can't afford to live here anymore because I rent and I'm cost burdened, so I'm going to leave to go somewhere else further south to something, or so that's like, I know we're not going to solve that scenario, the situation, but I think it's something we should think about as we're navigating through this.
Yeah. Well, and at the margin, they're, depending on the size of services bundle that you create, at the margin, it's going to bring people in who want services and find that to be affordable on one side, and it's going to take people at the other end who can't afford it and cause them to go live someplace else if they move because of costs. And that's
Can't afford to lose.
that's just a fact of this sort of thing. And it's, a lot of times it's hard to measure the effect of those decisions, but that's, each city has its own bundle of services, and that drives demand for housing in the community. So if you could,
that'll be your discussion at the end of October. That's the wrestling match.
That's right. That's why we're putting all this time in to have this conversation, because there's a lot of stuff you got to load in your head in order to think about this question to answer that. So if you go back to the next slide, it's not back, forward to the next slide. And I want to kind of follow up on a point that Jessica made, because I think it's a very important one. I think here's how this is actually going to end up going down. I think on this chart, we're going to pick 3 revenue combinations that are effectively, there will be a cell from the worst case row, there will be a cell maybe from the moderate case row, and a cell from the best case row. Okay, that will be combinations of things. And each of those, let's say, and don't take this as a proposal, but let's say hypothetically, we pick worst case 6%, we got to go get $1 million out of there. We pick moderate case 2%, we got to go get $2.4 million. And we pick best case 2%, we've got to go find $400,000. Not a whole lot of money. Then I think we've got kind of a target. We'll listen to the department chairs talk about the things that they're doing, and we'll have conversations about the trade-offs that ends up making. And there's going to be one set of things we'll be able to buy for one price, another set of things that we can buy for the second one, a third set of things that we can buy for the third. At that point, I think we can choose to change the revenue side a little bit to say, okay, I'd like to spend a little bit more and get that one thing that we're not able to get, or say that really that last thing that was on the margin we got to get rid of and lower the property tax impact on that particular scenario. So I think there's some trade-off that can be made there, because I think you're right. Is in a normal family, if you don't have a lot of money come in, you're really focused on the expense side, and for better or for worse, we have the opportunity to consider both sides of this when we're making that decision. And it's easier to have the conversation if you pick one side and make a preliminary decision, and then go through the other one and then kind of true it up. And given the data that we're getting and where we're at in the process, I think getting the revenue side, at least some preliminaries in there, because it tells the staff, here's the scope of the expense impacts that you have to kind of come back with to have a conversation about, and then we can get that interplay going. I think that's the arc that when Neil and I have been talking about this, that we've had a conversation about.
Mr. Chairs and committee members, maybe it'd be a little helpful. Kari and I had referred to it earlier, and I don't think we got into the details of what's assumed in the best case and the moderate case and the worst case. Maureen asked a little bit about it in terms of, the forecasts, especially as it relates to lodging and business travel. Most of the assumptions around each of these worst case, moderate case, best case scenarios has to do with the pandemic, right? So in the worst case scenario, as an example, it assumes that things are so bad that we still aren't even close to a vaccine, that distancing and face coverings are not having the intended effect, and it's the impact to the threat is such that businesses have to close again, right? As we go through a second round of closure, and obviously the biggest impact there is that Mall of America closes again, which has the most dramatic impact. But then you also see it in the hotels and elsewhere. So that assumes a fall 2020 second round of business closures, and it has the slow recovery not happening until sometime into late 2022. So it's a situation where the economic slowdown persists for about 2 years. Okay. The moderate case scenario envisions that a vaccine is widely distributed by the second half of next year. And so you start to see things picking up as a result of widespread vaccination. It also assumes that businesses sort of stay on the same platform they are now, where they slowly start to improve. And then the best case scenario is that we get limited impact from the school reopenings, that you get a 15-minute saliva test available by October or November, that we start to see widespread distribution of a vaccine in the first half of next year, and then you start to see the economy as a result coming back a lot faster. So most of the scenario here is based on where your comfort level is forecasting how we think that our public health system is going to respond to the pandemic, and how quickly we can get a vaccine to market. That's really the biggest assumption in here.
Mr. Chair?
John.
Well, I've been trying to absorb all of this back and forth. And Maureen, I about 100% agree with your worst case scenario. Jamie, I think part of the flaw, and this is my personal observation, of the pandemic is that I think business is going to take a look and say, I was 100% business travel, I was 100% hotel, I was 100% all over the map. And guess what? I found out that only half of my people have to travel at all. So I think the new norm is just a fraction of what the old goal was. Pandemic or no pandemic, that's including getting a vaccine. And I look at around the country, football is postponed till next spring or later. What do these people know that we don't know? That's their biggest single source of revenue other than admissions. And they're willing to put that on hold. I think we got to wake up and smell the roses here. Another observation is we keep talking about different scenarios, and I think we've kind of narrowed it down to 3 choices, as we said before, 3 or 4. I have enough trouble trying to manipulate 3. Adding a 4th only adds confusion, I think. So I think we should agree that best, moderate, and worst are about as much as anybody can handle. So as I look at this, I am really focused on the worst case scenario as being the scenario. And another thing that's going to get me in a lot of trouble, but spent a whole life doing that, so. I'm concerned that we're overly concerned about pleasing the council. I think we got to please 85,000 citizens. And if we're to do our job, the council may not like what we're recommending, but doggone it, that's what we, as a group, decided. And I'm just supposing because I don't know where we're going to end up. But I'm not as concerned about pleasing the council right now as doing what I think is right for 85,000 citizens. Thank you.
Akia is next.
Well, I'm sorry, excuse me. I don't need to go anymore because that's exactly what my thoughts were as well, John, that we should stick, or we should really think about the worst case scenario, even as Jamie mentioned, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next quarter, and we're going to have holidays, and people are going to travel, and they're going to be with their families, and so you're going to see spikes of some type of illness around Thanksgiving, around Christmas, and so you're going to push back people going to work, like you said, maybe until next year, and then you're going to have a new norm. So we're going to be trying to adjust our normal operations. So it's just a comment, I guess, that one of the best options for us is to consider the worst case scenario about how to move forward.
So I'm gonna say this in terms of kind of what I'm hearing from the group is I think the worst case scenario really so we could choose to say we're gonna work inside the worst case scenario and have 3 property tax levels inside that. We could choose to do that sort of thing as opposed to picking one from each row. That's certainly a workable thing. If folks wanted to do that, because I think, and that's consistent kind of with where I've seen this going too, which is that I've wanted to make sure that we kind of propose a set of options that more likely than not we'll be able to kind of grow our way out of, as opposed to things that kind of make the city have to continue to make cuts going forward. So unless there's a big objection to it, what I'd like to propose to do for tonight is that we're going to say that we're going to kind of focus on that worst case line there, and that we're going to focus our conversation initially on what number we want to pick as the highest levy number under that scenario, because that's the number that we're going to go report back to the council on the preliminary levy. And the other ones I think tonight we can also talk about picking some other numbers there. I don't think we have to be as firm on that because we don't have to make a final decision on that tonight, but if we can drive to a final number on the highest preliminary levy number in the worst case scenario, that would be a useful milestone for us to achieve tonight. Neil, and then Maureen.
And I concur. The question I have is if you don't then agree to levy that amount, then you're making the assumption that we're going to go into the budget and cut another couple $1 million out, so that the percentage of the levy drives the decision to cut expenses. I don't know how that works. I'm not making myself clear, but you said that we go with the worst case, and then we start looking at the levy number, whether it be 4 or 5 or 6%. That levy number just falls right out of the revenue side, doesn't it?
Well, it depends on where we
go through and start slashing and burning.
Depends on which level of expenses we choose to have.
Right.
So each levy, if we pick the worst case row and accept those as assumptions, then we have to pick, and we say that that's what our 3 scenarios are going to be based on, is on the worst case. Then we're going to end up picking 3 levy numbers.
Okay.
As part of that, the highest levy number is going to be the maximum levy. So we'll never go any higher than that. The final scenarios that we have can really be any levy numbers we want, as long as they're below that maximum number. And then each one of those is going to have a matching expense number.
But there's a gap. It creates a gap.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay.
So an example is let's say that we went back to the council tonight and we said, and again, this isn't a proposal. Let's say we said we want the maximum levy to be 7%. We could come back to the council, and our proposal could be a 6%, a 3%, and a 0% one. We could certainly do that, and then have expense scenarios for each one of those if we had consensus around that.
Okay.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
It does, but they'll reject them all. That's my concern. As John, as you said, they just say, no, we're not going to do that. Then our goal is to say, okay, we've given you our best shot. Good luck. You have 3 weeks to get it done.
Yeah, I think and part of the reason why I went and had feedback is my goal is to not present scenarios to the council that are just going to be categorically rejected, because I don't think we're serving the charge that we have to present things that they're completely opposed to. But at the same time, to the point that John has to say is, we may have to go to the council and say there's some difficult medicine that has to be taken, and the medicine may be in the jar that's labeled taxes. or the medicine may be in the jar that says spend less money in this way. Okay. And there's a difficult message. And so as we get more into this, I think we want to make sure the council knows what we're up to and we're getting feedback from them on it, so that if there's the feeling that we're getting outside of kind of the bounds of what they're willing to adopt, we don't end up in that situation. Because I don't want to end up in October kind of jamming the council with something, and then they're like, okay, we can't do that, and then they do something completely different, because then we're not really serving the objective that they put together for us. I see John's hand up. John, do you have a question or a comment? John, you're muted.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Ah, great. Yeah, I was just thinking about Neil's point, and of course the levy would fall out of the budget in the ordinary course, but it seems to me, given where we are, we perhaps, especially if we adopt the presumption, which seems very reasonable to me given how it was defined, of the worst case, it seems to me it is responsible enough to look at what a upper reasonable feasible levy might be, so that Jamie and staff really do have a target when they look at cuts. And it seems to me if we don't give that sense pretty darn soon, it's hard to get real serious about specific cuts. And if I was in Jamie's shoes anyway, I think I would sure like to know that folks were thinking along the lines of this worst case scenario and thinking about an upper levy that's at a certain number, so that I knew if I was chasing 1.7 million or 2.9 million or 1 million. And so that's why, while it does seem upside down, Neil, in some ways, I agree. I don't know how we avoid it in this situation. And I got to believe the council's sentiment, which obviously wasn't a council decision, but perhaps a sentiment from conversation, is reflective of, of what they're hearing in the community, and a rough justice sense of tolerance. And I suspect they're not wildly off. So I do like the scenario where we create a preference for planning based on worst case. And we see if there's some consensus about what the upper end tolerance, if you will, is percentage-wise on a levy at this point. I know we can go deeply into how we would sell this, that, or another thing. But we will get to that, and that gets to the engagement piece later. But I think we are well served by getting some targets out there pretty soon. Mm-hmm. And I think this matrix lays out to me what are some pretty natural peg points.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, John. Kari, will you bring up the slide that has the median value home cost impacts? So as next one.
Oh, go ahead.
Yep, after the
This one?
This one right there. Yep. So after the last few comments, I think this is getting at the question that I'm hearing from committee members is, essentially what are you going to recommend to the council is the most you're going to ask from residents in this. So each percentage change is about another 95 cents per month. So this doesn't cover all the ones we had on that previous slide, but if you were to go up to 5%, that's probably about $42 a year. Okay, 4% is about $35 a year or $30 a year. So I think one of the ways to frame this is for the committee to be able to say when you go out and do community engagement in September is this is the recommendation we made to council is at the very most we're going to ask the owner of a median value home to pay X dollars more next year than you are this year, right? And so I guess, I think this helps you figure out what that number is and then talk about how that feels. Is $30 the right number? Is $42 the right number? Is $50 the right number? Because that's 7 is the high end. That's in that $75 range, $70 range. As you start to come down, the 5% is $42. 4% is 30. So does that help at all to try and frame this up? What's a reasonable ask of residents? So if it's the 9 of you making the decision and not the 7 council members, what would you say is the most that you'd want to ask your neighbors to pay next year?
Have to solve it.
I'm cool with that.
John.
Going back to one of our very first meetings, I think I made a comment about those that have the least are impacted the most. And it seems to keep resonating in my mind that I don't care about the person that lives in a $500,000 or $750,000 house. $50, $60, $70 a year it's a night out at a restaurant, a cheap restaurant, but doing what I did for 40 years and seeing the impact that a few dollars can make on the people that have the least, I think we got to keep that in focus too, that we've got to be sensitive to the fact that when we are talking about these numbers, I want to be able to face all 85,000 people and be able to talk to those that have the least and say, we tried our hardest and this is the best we could do. And so I think that kind of steers us towards the worst case scenario, but that's the highest tax levy too. And so now the only way to chop that down is to cut expenses. And last week, I didn't hear a lot of fat in those budgets. I just, we got a difficult task, but let me focus my comment to let's keep our focus on those that have the least ability to pay and see how we can help them the most.
Okay, so here's what I'd like to do as kind of a next step, just to kind of get a sense of where people are at right now. Is I'd like to propose that I'm going to give each person a blank piece of paper, okay? And you're going to write in the city manager's frame, you're going to write a dollar amount, which is that annual dollar amount, and 7% is $75, 5% is $42, 4% is $30. You're just going to write down what you think the maximum number ought to be, and then we'll just tabulate that, and we'll talk about those answers just to see what the group is thinking around that. And John, you can just type yours in the chat window, and I'll make a ballot for you here. And so let's do that, and let's just get a sense of where people are at in a way that we can kind of get the conversation going. So if folks are okay with that, I'll distribute pieces of paper. And go ahead, Maureen.
So this would be, Mr. Chair, our starting point.
Starting point for the maximum.
Okay.
For the maximum,
Okay.
the maximum amount from a property tax perspective that we do. Yep. Okay.
So it is basically.
It also sets the minimum for what we're going to have as a reduction target.
Yeah. Right. And so do we? I'm proposing that we do it in terms of dollars per year on the median valued home in the frame that the city manager put. So just to go back to so we don't have all of the choices. Let's go back one slide here. To where that's not the slide I'm looking for. The one that has the
Worst case.
scenarios and the dollar amounts at the top. The kind of summary slide. I think it's forward 3 from here. 2
Monthly
from here.
impact one?
Yeah. No.
The one that we were on.
Yeah, the one that we were on just a little bit ago. Yeah. I want to make sure that we're.
This one?
Yeah. Okay, so Jamie, you had numbers like dollars per month for each of the things here. So at this 7% levy one, the far rightmost column, that was $75. Do you have numbers for each of the amounts going across there that we could talk about?
Unless Kari has them handy, I think 5 is about, what did I say that number was?
42.
542.
And
So
4 was
4% is about 31.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not trying to.
Write it down.
Yeah.
I'm-
So if you
I'm gonna
if you
type
can
it
make
in
that
here.
one, oh, you have those numbers. Okay.
Oh, I don't have the
Okay.
official number. I
you
can
could-
do
yeah.
approximate.
If you can just make this bigger, we can interpolate on it.
Mm-hmm.
So just restore that to a
Actually,
to-
$32 at
Okay.
4%. Yep.
Okay. So I'll
I'm
yeah.
following you.
I'll get yeah.
Follow you.
So if you can
She's gonna update it.
yeah.
First.
Sorry. I was thinking that I would actually type in what we were saying
Oh, okay.
and then bring it back
There
up.
just didn't have the full range, I think. That
Right, right.
So this one, whoops, go back one.
Yep.
No?
No,
Yep, the cost impact one. Yeah.
That one.
So if you take
Here we go.
the column that says dollar change,
Yeah.
right, and you multiply that by 12 because that's a monthly amount.
You have the official numbers from our CFO.
Ah, there you go.
Okay.
CFO came through. All right.
So on the back of a piece of paper here, let's all write down something because we're going to make something up here as we go. Okay.
So these are annual costs for the median
Yeah.
value home.
Okay.
So at 7%, it would be $64.80.
$64.80 at 7%. Okay.
6% would be $53.52.
Okay.
5% would be $42.24.
Okay.
4%, $30.96 per year. 3% is $19.68. And then that's as far as we have, she had calculated here, but
I
at
think that's
2%,
fine
it's
for
like
the
69
maximum
cents a
levy
month, and
discussion.
then-
I haven't heard anybody who's down at that level for the maximum levy. Okay. So we have written down here just to recap the numbers. 7% is $64.87. 6% is $53.52. 5% is $42.24. 4% is $30.96, and 3% is $19.68. Okay? So what I'm proposing is that you will take a piece of paper, that second number, that dollar per year number, you're going to put down what you're comfortable with for the maximum levy and expressed as dollars per year. Okay? So for example, if you thought that like you wanted to go at the high end of this, you could write $65, and that's slightly more than 7% on that number. And then what we're going to do is we'll just read off the results of that and see where people are at on that. Okay? Yeah, Neil.
Just a comment. The council, though, the last 5 or 6 years have done a 5%. Right.
I will bring that slide up so you can.
Yeah,
see
I mean,
it
that's
for
been the norm for quite a number of years. So it's realistic they going below that number that
So,
they've always used that number last 5 years. There it is.
yes.
So the preliminary has been 6%, 6.5, 4.87, 7.72, 6.85. So it's actually bounced around quite a bit.
Okay, but I'm looking at the final number where
That's
the
not
council
tonight's.
ends up.
That's not tonight's number, though. We're
Well,
doing
no,
that-
I know that. I'm just saying, but I would suggest that they have done that number for the last 5 years or 6 years. It's not an uncomfortable number.
Yeah. Okay, so does everyone understand what I'm asking you to do?
Yeah.
Okay. If you need a pen, let me know. I will have a pen with me as I distribute these pieces of paper.
Well, mine's already got a number written on it.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, as you're distributing the paper, we don't have to stick exactly to the $64.80, 53, any dollar.
Go use the restroom.
They don't want to hear the verdict.
And while I tabulate the results, we have a couple folks who need a break, so we're going to take a break until 8:45. break, and while folks were gone, I typed in the numbers that we got from the poll and sent them to the staff and asked them just to paste them into a slide. So these are the numbers, and this again is expressed in kind of annual dollar impact on the median valued home. And so if I was looking at this and I was going to propose something that we could build a consensus around, I would say that the $60 number has the most support in terms of being able to gather the most number of people around it. And so I'm interested in other people's reactions to this list. So while we're thinking about that, can you tell us what the $60 number, what does that represent as a percentage? Is that roughly 6.5? Is that where that's at?
Probably close.
I see Lori over there typing in her spreadsheet. Carrie, if you go back to that kind of chart that shows the numbers that we were just looking at there. So any other thoughts on that prior to Lori getting done kind of figuring that out? It will be roughly 6.5. That's what we'll be talking about there. And I'm saying this as a consensus because I think we've decided we're not doing majority, and that represents the bulk of the group's feeling would be at that level. Maureen.
Are you waiting for comments? It's kind of gone quiet.
Waiting a little bit for comments. Also, Lori had the rough number, but I'm looking for feedback from the committee on that concept.
Mr. Chair, members, I am comfortable with the 6.6 or whatever the percent at 60 comes out to be.
I agree.
Okay. Anybody else have any feedback on that?
And Mr. Chair, this is setting at the max.
This is this is our proposal for what the maximum levy number would be. So it would be whatever percentage $60 backs into as the on the median valued home. Any other comments?
I would only comment, I'm not uncomfortable with it, but I would note that 4 of the 7 entries you submitted were less than the 60, and some pretty materially. So I guess I'm just thinking about that impact question that somebody raised earlier, and if we assume that medium market value home currently has a city part of their property tax at $11.50, I think that's the number, roughly 3 times that for their overall property tax. I guess I'm just looking at the $60 in the context of 60 on top of $11.50 in the what will be the middle of a really severe recession, and I'm not uncomfortable with it, but it feels heavier than consensus, and I think there's a rationale to be pretty darn cautious at 60.
The other thing we could do is if you were to pick the middle values, $55 would be the middle value on that list. But here's the thing, and the other thing I want to point out is we're setting a maximum, and as I pointed out before, even our most expensive actual proposal to the council doesn't have to be at the maximum levy. In fact, I would propose that there's a good idea that we don't deliver something at that maximum levy number.
Yeah, I'm absolutely comfortable with that. I'm on the border end of comfort, but I'm.
Yep.
There's 2 Johns.
Yep. Okay, so what I'm hearing is, in terms of kind of picking a preliminary levy number to report back to the council, that we're going to, the consensus of the group that we go with that $60 number to start with. And, subject to the fact that we don't think we're actually going to deliver a proposal at that level, but we want to, as the city manager pointed out, have some flexibility at this point. Any other comments on that before we go on?
So I will add for the committee, so $60 would equate to just over 6.5% tax levy increase.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, John.
Jamie, how does that, or whoever, how does that relate to department heads relative to their cuts? Does that give you any sense of what that might look like?
Yeah, Mr. Chairs, committee members, John, it gives me my starting point, so we can go back to the directors and say, look, we know that we have to reduce our budget by at least $1 million. And understanding the discussion here tonight that we want to maybe focus on 3 different scenarios. What's occurring to me, and you can tell me otherwise, is to maybe give direction to staff that we're going to look at something that's a 5, 3, and a 1. The 1% levy increase effectively becomes a flat tax based on the way the property valuation works. So a 1% levy increase for a median value home is about a 0% increase. What we'll do is we will ask departments to put together options, and then we will sort of compile those into these different groupings. This is why I was saying I don't know that we're going to need that third meeting, because I think we can work through some of that understanding of what impacts would be for potential reductions during the second go-round, because we're going to get them started on putting those together in the next week or two, especially for police and fire. They're scheduled to come back September 9th. So we want them to be able to come back and give you some good information to work with. So all of our scenarios aren't necessarily related to, well, they are related to departments. There's just some departments that haven't come through yet. But we have a number of things that are floating out there that were set aside earlier this year by the council because they wanted to see them in the context of the full budget. So we still have some of those conversations to inject into the conversation as well. So long answer, John. The short answer is it sets our floor, and we're going to give direction to the departments on what that upper limit is, and then we'll work back from there.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions about that? So I think we also heard from the manager there that from a kind of preliminary concept around the 3 levels, it'd be the kind of 5, 3, and 1% levy increase as the kind of starting point for the conversations about the expense level sorts of things. And that sets kind of some boundaries for the departments in terms of what they're going to be talking about in terms of expense reductions. We've also talked about wanting to have choices at the committee in terms of things that we do. So necessarily what that's going to mean is that departments are going to have conversations beyond what those expense levels imply in order to present a couple different scenarios to us and have us being able to pick between things. So Jessica, you got a comment?
Yeah, I'm wondering if this number, it is black and white, or as we learn more in September, perhaps we can change the number to reflect the reality.
The only number that we're about to set in stone is the preliminary levy number. So that's a absolute, once the council adopts the preliminary levy, it's not legally possible for them to set the levy any higher than that. But they and us, because we've been delegated the responsibility, we have complete flexibility to set it at any level lower than that. So really the deliverable, if you remember big picture, we've got those 3 deliverables, which is the preliminary levy, the 3 expense scenario, the 3 revenue scenarios, and the 3 expense scenarios. The preliminary levy kind of sets the outer bound of what we can raise on property taxes.
What I'm thinking is what happens if we learn that, keep digging with the unemployment thing. Could be that, we go back and everything is great and we can levy higher, or if the situation is getting worse, we can change. So that's where I'm seeing if we can book that number in September, or like you're saying, it's going to be 6%, 6.5. I think that was what you came up with.
So,
And that's the recommendation, Jamie, or how?
yeah, Mr. Chairs and committee members, Jessica, I think, so the way this will play out is that the recommendation goes to the city council on August 31st at their study session, when we'll be talking about budget with the council. They're not expected to actually adopt the preliminary levy until September 14th or the 21st, one of those two dates. It has to be done by the end of September. I think it's the 14th is the day that we're targeting. So if between now and then the committee has buyer's remorse on that number, we can certainly communicate back to the council a reconsidered number before they set it September 14th. And once it's set September 14th, that's what it is.
Okay, thanks.
And so I think if you look at kind of our communication to the council is, we'll be going to the council on the 31st. Is that the date? On the 31st to talk about the number that we picked. And if the 6 or 5% plus or minus number is the one that is the one that we send, that's the one that will go there. We've got 2 meetings between now and then. If folks are feeling queasy about that number, that we can end up talking about that. And I think in the conversation and with the proposal from the manager, where we set it at 6.5, but we start building scenarios around 5% as our kind of real maximum. That leaves us some flexibility if circumstances change to kind of operate a little bit underneath that in terms of being able to do that. And we've also got the time flexibility that Jamie talked about. Okay. Okay, so unless there's other comments, I think we're going to kind of take that as the value that we're going to talk about. I think in the next week, here's what I'll ask is, if you want to have more conversation about this, you should let the 2 co-chairs know that you want to have more conversation about it. Otherwise, our intention is that we won't put it on the agenda as an agenda item for next week. But if people wanted to talk about it more, we could, but we've got other things that we want to get through in that meeting. And I don't want to put it on if people are still feeling comfortable with the consensus that we've come to tonight. So is everybody okay with that in terms of process?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Is that enough on 4.2, or was there anything else that you wanted us to hit on tonight?
Nope, that's good, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to 4.3 and the engagement plan status update.
All right. So if you recall, a few weeks back, Emily Larson from our Community Outreach and Engagement Division joined us and talked about different options we had for community engagement. And this is some detail on what we will actually be doing and taking your input into the engagement plan. And Emily had offered to be here tonight, but I said it might be a little late by the time we get to this. So I said that, so she helped me put this together. So we appreciate, she's been doing a lot to help put this plan together and engage the community. So I'm just going to go over the engagement plan overview and schedule and talk about, we're having community partners conversations, some community listening sessions. We talked about this new software that we have that we are in the process of implementing. It's a digital engagement tool. It was called Bang the Table. For Bloomington, it is branded as Let's Talk Bloomington, so we're not calling it Bang the Table. That's what the software is, but it'll be on the city's website soon. And communications plan, and just revisit the stakeholders that you had identified with Emily early on. So the engagement plan is broken out into 2 phases. Phase 1 is now in September, talking to the community about community values in the city budget, more high level. And then phase 2 is reactions and reflections on the draft budget scenarios that you will be determining. And then I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint and bring up the Excel schedule that was attached to the agenda item. Just to kind of walk you through this engagement plan that Emily has put together. And the way this is laid out in the far right column here, the boxes are color coded. So if they're gray, they're on hold. If they are yellow, they're in progress. If they're green, confirmed, and red is completed, is how she has it mapped out. And we had talked about BEV, the Bloomington Engagement Vehicle, that is a resource. And right now, that is on hold. Community Outreach and Engagement Division has been working with our risk and litigation manager and public health and trying to figure out a way to safely be able to do that without having to have a large amount of staff and cleaning preparations and the tools that they use to engage people and being able to do that in a safe way. They're still having conversations about that. So ideally, we would like to take that out into the community, but not sure if that is going to be feasible right now, but it's something we're still looking into. It's on hold. And then, so that's the first three things there. We do have a draft flyer that we also attached to the agenda that we're going to be putting out. We're also going to be sending it out to the committee to be able to send that to your networks and people you know to get that out into the community. We'll be putting it in all of the city buildings, like Dwan Golf Course. We'll be putting out at the Farmers Market and City Hall. We'll sending it out on social media. I have a draft here to show you what it looks like. So it's called Participate in the City's Budget Process. And it's showing how to participate. So just a short explanation here about this, multi-million-dollar budget shortfall as a result of COVID-19 that's impacting us. And then on the right here are ways to participate. So along with these two community listening sessions that we are going to have on September 17th in the evening and then Saturday the 19th in the morning, and these are going to be either through Zoom or through WebEx digital video conference. We're also going to we have 2 October dates as well. So we'll have those advertised as well as the website link for the Community Budget Advisory Committee. And then there's going to be, this isn't going to say, right now this draft says that this link has not gone live yet. The link will have gone live when we put this flyer out, and we'll direct them to the Let's Talk Bloomington page that will have ways that you can submit information there that I'll go in more detail here. So that's the flyer. And then along with those community listening sessions, there are community partner groups that the city meets with regularly that we already have relationships with, and we're going to be doing kind of the same conversations targeted to them and trying to get groups that maybe not are always included in these types of conversations and get their input. And so we, for example, we have the Latinx group that's scheduled for August 18th, so it's coming up really soon. We're going to be scheduling something with Bloomington Leadership Program alumni, which some of you are in that group as well. And then September 1st with the East African community leaders, we have something scheduled in the afternoon. We're going to be, there's a group, the Potter's House group, which is an African-American target audience that we're going to try and do something in September. So right now Emily is working on getting all these scheduled. And then we have something scheduled for September 9th with Creekside Community Center. We're working with the business community. Emily's been in touch, and so is Jamie with the chamber to have an event to get the business community involved. We have September 12th for having something with the farmers market and advertising, ways to engage in this conversation. And then we have the listening session. So September 17th, September 19th, and then hopefully, here it is, the goal was to launch it by August 1st, but we're hoping, we just had training this morning, actually. I just saw it live this morning, and they set as a demo for all of the staff that are going to be using this, not just for budget, but for all kinds of community engagement opportunities. They used the Community Budget Advisory Committee information we gave them to set it up. So hopefully within a week or so, that will be live. And then, so that's phase one. And then phase two is, and I'll talk about in just a minute here, like what the format's going to be like that for phase one for the community listening sessions and for the community partner conversations. And then for October, this isn't as mapped out yet, but it will be. And this is going to be an opportunity to then react and reflect on the different scenarios that the committee puts forward. That's going to be to get that input. So that's going to be in October. It's October 15th and October 17th are the Zoom, the virtual conference community listening sessions that are going to be on that flyer as well. And then again, meeting with, again, the same community partner groups. So I'll go back to my presentation here, to the PowerPoint. So that's the schedule. And that was sent out. It's on the agenda. It's also on the website for Community Budget Advisory Committee.
Sorry.
Yes.
Quick question. I don't see here a group for youth. Do we have a group for the youth, and how are we reaching them to be part of all of this?
Do we have? That is a very good question. Thank you, Jessica. I know we just recently, there was a youth forum. So I think that we'll talk to community outreach about that, about having their input as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so this list is just those, and you're correct, we don't have one that's specifically for youth. That's a great idea. And then we have some of the dates that we have mapped out for August and September. And then again, community listening sessions. So phase one is feedback about city services in September, and then feedback on proposed budget options in October. And then just to give you a sense of how we're planning out the listening sessions and these focused conversations with community partners is just a brief, kickoff presentation from one of the co-chairs, just kind of telling like what the purpose of why this group was created and what you're doing and what your deliverables will be. And then either Jamie or else I will do a brief presentation just about what we're facing for 2021 budget shortfall. And then we're going to do a focused conversation to promote inclusive participation, meaningful exchange, and it's what we do this a lot at the city for focused conversations. It's an ORID approach, and the O is an objective question, R reflective question, I is interpretive, and D is decisional. So the types of questions were, after having information about why this committee was formed and what the work you're doing, and then a presentation about this budget shortfall to the people participating, like what stands out to them from the presentation, so that everyone can kind of answer that question, and then asking people about what city program, service, or amenity do they value the most, or what do they think needs the most improvement in Bloomington. And then for interpretive question, when you are considering the budget shortfall, what gives you cause for concern? What opportunities will this change provide for the organization? And then decisional, how would you solve the problem of the budget shortfall and getting that input? And then this is optional, but there's also be an opportunity if they would like to give their demographic information, like their race, ethnicity, an age range that they can select, zip code, or if they're an owner or renter, and that will be optional. And then, as I said before, this Let's Talk Bloomington website, this is the brand new tool that we have, and we just had training this morning, and we're hoping within a week or so it would be live. So the initial questions for August and September will target the values of residents, similar to listening session questions. And then in October, we'll be more specific about the different budget scenarios for them to weigh in on. But there'll be specific survey questions And also, along with surveys, there's they have idea boards where you can put different ideas of what they would do to address the budget shortfall, or taking polls. Like one of the polls, it's to solve this, would you do this by raising taxes? Would you do it by cutting all expenses to be able to match the revenue shortfall? Or would you do a mixture of both? That's like one of the polls or surveys that are on there. So then we can have all that information to share with you to give you that input. And for communications, we're going to be advertising all these listening sessions and the website. We're gathering information in the briefing that goes out monthly, Facebook, Twitter, social media, the Bloomington Today show. And I did hear back from Emily, a different Emily Taplin that does our Bloomington Today show. So I get that information to. I'll probably set up a meeting, Steve and John, with Emily but she has opportunity to have you on the show to promote it. There's e-subscribes where emails go out. Like I said, the flyer and sharing information in the city buildings, lobbies, and then we do press releases. And depending on what's going on in news media, those get wider spread. Typically, they for sure go into the Sun Current. Sometimes it'll get picked up, maybe Star Tribune as well, if there's not a lot going on. And then we also have we'll be sending this out to the list that we have with the community leaders. There's also faith community leaders, multi-unit housing leaders, our community partners like VEEP, Bloomington Public Schools, Normandale Community College, Oasis for Youth, Cornerstone, Chamber of Commerce. She had a question here too. Are there other groups that you know of that we could send this information to, or if that you could send the information to advertise for us? So something to let us know.
Yeah, if you have ideas on that, be sure to send them into staff. You can email them.
And then just the last slide here this was based on when Emily Larson was here before, and this is what the committee had identified as stakeholders in this process. So Bloomington residents, taxpayers, with a priority of residents that are not typically heard from in public participation efforts, specifically Black, Indigenous, people of color residents, seniors, and also as a priority, those that are going to be most impacted by these budget decisions in terms of maybe increased taxes or services that are cut. Bloomington businesses were a stakeholder that was identified. The community partners like Bloomington Public Schools and the Normandale Chamber of Commerce. And then just as another thing too, are there other stakeholders that you've thought of that we should be considering? And that is all I had as an update of where we're at and what the plan is for getting community engagement in this process and communicating what we're doing and how we will have engagement opportunities.
One question.
Go ahead.
Carrie. So help me understand, we are doing all these meetings and so how that's interpreted, how those results will come up to us, or how that will work?
Yes, thank you, chairs and committee members and Jessica. So we will be, like for the website, there's reports that we can pull off of it as people are putting out information, and we'll share that with the committee. And then we will be taking notes and getting the responses from from the community listening sessions and from the conversations with the community partners that are planned, to share that also with the community too, just to give you what the feedback that we're getting.
Emily will be compiling all of the input into one report that we'll provide to the committee. So you'll be able to see sort of the aggregation of all of the feedback. And I'm not sure exactly how the report will work, but what we've done in the past is sort of sort them into themes that we heard. So I can't predict how Emily's going to format the report right now, but we'll get a better sense as we get through the engagements. The whole point is for the committee to be able to get a sense of where, people who are participating, where their concerns are, what their priorities are to help you.
Thanks, Jamie. What I'm wondering is if that report will go more into detail, what the seniors are thinking, what the BIPAC people are thinking, so we know exactly what's those buckets are.
Oh, yes, chairs and committee members, Jessica, there will be, at the community listening sessions and also on the website, there is opportunities to put optional information about race and ethnicity and age, so we will have that information to share as well, if it's given. Yes.
Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but we certainly don't expect you to attend that big long list, but if there's a particular group that you want to be in on, or you want to come to the farmer's market and be present, and work side by side with staff and hearing from residents, you're all certainly invited to do that. It's just we recognize that that's a lengthy list of engagement sessions for any kind of, any but one person to attend. But if there's a group on that list and you want to be invited to be part of that conversation and hear the feedback firsthand, just, let Brianna know that, and she'll make sure to get you the more scheduling information as it becomes finalized.
Okay, any other comments or questions? John?
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm looking at stakeholders. Priority, residents that are not typically heard from in public participation efforts. I didn't see anything up there that reaches out to that community. They don't have WebEx. They don't know how to work Zoom. Most of them don't have computers. And you're basing all of this on technology. And I think you're missing the point of how to get a hold of these people. I don't have a good answer, but I don't think what you're doing, I don't think you're going to get to the people that I'm voiced a concern about. They don't have technology at their fingertips. I would suggest that police and others, they went through a laundry list of different ways that they talk to people. And it's just, they go to where the people are. Coffee with a cop, and I mean, there's a lot of different examples, and that's why I went, and I forget the name, that vehicle.
Oh, yes.
Bev.
Huh?
Bev.
Bev. And I get the logistics of sanitizing and cleaning and all of that. But I still think there's a gap in there that we're not reaching the people we need to reach.
I share your concern. It's a really tough environment right now to try and do citizen engagement.
A quick comment. Could we go to different centers like BEEP or any others and set a booth there or a table? Or I mean, I'm just thinking loud here, right? What other places that we can go and...
The city of Bloomington sponsors Loaves and Fishes.
There you go.
We get up to 150 people.
Yeah.
And these are people that are of need. There's certainly room in there for a table to hand out information and flyers and whatever. And
Unfortunately, they're getting their food to go right now.
so we hand them a flyer to go,
We could be
can.
in that
I mean,
line,
really,
that
there's-
pickup line, certainly.
right?
Yep.
Okay, other ideas or thoughts? Akia?
I just have a question, I guess, with our community engagement strategy. Like, what would be our measure of success, I guess? Because obviously we're in a really challenging situation with COVID. We can't really meet in person. We can't host like listening events physically. So I guess what would be a measure of success? If we get 2 people to show up to like a Zoom meeting, if we talk to 3 people, like how do we know if we've done enough within the constraints of our current environment? Oh, sorry, Chair. I meant to lead with. But
That's a really good question, and I'm going to put that one back to Emily Larson and COED to see, what they've been setting as their own benchmarks for participation. We tried 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago. No, about 2 months ago, we had a couple of virtual town halls for our park system master plan, And I would describe the attendance as disappointing, right? I think part of the issue here is how to get people to care about the issue, right? And what's going to motivate them to participate. I think that determines an awful lot in somebody's decision to whether they're going to make the time to do it. But let's ask Emily, and we'll provide a response back to the committee about that. That's a good question.
Okay, other feedback? Okay, thank you.
That is all I had for this
Okay.
evening.
Great, that was a great update. Okay, we're getting close to time here. So any final comments? I'll start out. I'm really heartened by the conversation that we had on the preliminary levy. I thought that was great progress by the group, and I thought it was a really good conversation that was really pointed toward kind of getting one of our deliverables done. And it's a big milestone for the committee that we're able to kind of get that going. And I think we have a framework for delivering on the other two items that we need to deliver on. So I think that's a big deliverable in the meeting tonight that I'm feeling good about. Other comments or observations about what we're up to?
Mr.
Neil.
Are you going to get out of the Northwoods when you're in your canoe to get to that meeting on the 31st?
But I'll be back on the 31st. That's the theory anyway. So I may have a bug bite or two. You'll probably see like some sunburn and bug bites and stuff like that. But should be back on that Monday. Okay. Unless there's any other comments for tonight, we are done for the evening. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.